I kind of want to I I kind of want to dive into what reversing insulin resistance really means and what it looks like. So, it's kind of my understanding that when you're insulin resistant, your cells, like in your cell membranes, are not what's the word I'm looking for? Permeable enough, or so for glucose to be able to enter the cell. So when insulin is there, the cell itself is not healthy enough for glucose to be able to enter. So it's like a cellular health issue. And correct me if I'm wrong there. But what does it actually look like or mean for insulin resistance to be reversed? Like what actually has to happen from a biological or maybe cellular level?
Yeah, well, you're correct in that where the cells just lose their sensitivity to the insulin. And so the glucose, I don't know if it's like the GLUT4 transporter is like tuning out insulin and it's not going up to the cell membrane like it should, and then glucose isn't coming in. I'd have to look up the specific pathological means, and my guess is it varies cell by cell. So every single cell on your body has an insulin receptor. And it's probably going to look different in the liver than it does in fat tissue and in muscles than it does in your brain. That physiological mechanism behind that cellular level. But what it looks like to reverse insulin resistance, what it takes to reverse it is to improve that cellular insulin sensitivity. And what we focus on is a low like insulin, first of all, but also low inflammation lifestyle. So it's important to note that inflammation drives high levels of insulin, and high levels of insulin are inflammatory. So it's the
Mm.
cycle that goes around and around. So if we're only paying attention to blood sugar and insulin levels, we're going to be missing this boat on inflammation. And that's where like the seed oils come into play, right? Because seed oils like canola oil, soybean oil, stuff that's in nearly every condiment, nearly every processed food, those are highly, highly inflammatory to your cells. But you're not going to see a direct rise in your blood glucose or your
Mm.
blood insulin levels because it's a fat, and fats have minimal impact on blood glucose and insulin. And that's one nutrient, but the other is fructose. So we've all heard of like the glycemic index of food, right? Diabetics especially are probably told to eat low glycemic index foods. It's just an index about how much a food will spike your blood sugar. Well, guess what sugar they're checking in the blood? They're checking your blood glucose. So what they're really checking is how does this potato or this piece of bread or this apple, how does that impact my blood glucose level? Well, we're completely overlooking fructose. And fructose is the sugar that's found naturally in fruit. Some vegetables might have some, and it's not really in grains. So pasta, rice, most breads have added sugar these days, but like the starchy components of the grains that make the breads, they don't have any fructose. Those are just molecules of glucose strung together. And so if you're only relying on like the glycemic index to figure out if a food's good for you or not, you're missing fructose. And this is the issue. So the glucose that you eat, that can be metabolized by any cell in your body, any single cell, your muscle, your liver, your thigh, your brain, all of that works. But for fructose, that is almost exclusively metabolized in the liver. And the liver has a very limited capacity to process fructose. So when you have like agave or honey, for example, those actually are higher in fructose than table sugar. They're going to have a lower glycemic impact than table sugar, but they are directly contributing to insulin resistance in the liver if you have them in excess. So things like bananas are very high in fructose. Certain fruits are high. So I think that's a really important conversation to have about like sneaky things that are causing insulin resistance that we think are healthy, but it's actually too much fructose, and you're not necessarily going to see that on a continuous glucose monitor if you're just checking your fasting glucose. And so when it comes to reversing insulin resistance, lowering those high insulin foods, lowering fructose, lowering the seed oils, Those are going to be three really, really important things. We have to support the liver because there's a debate too on like, where does insulin resistance really start? Some people think that it starts in the fat cells. Some people think that it starts in the liver. I don't really care where it starts. The intervention doesn't change. We got to keep those carbohydrates low, especially if you're not active. Not necessarily carnivore or ketogenic, but got to figure out how are we going to reduce the carbohydrates from all foods, not just the processed and refined foods, but from all foods. Like Weight Watchers has done such a disservice by making fruits and vegetables free because they are not free. They are definitely not. And then how do we reduce like added sugars, specifically high fructose corn syrup, added sugars? Those have got to come down. And then refined seed oils, like I talked about, a lot of processed food, anything fried will have a ton of inflammatory oils in them. French fries, chicken strips. I'm breaking people's hearts right now, but just being blunt. So I think that's a good start, is focusing on the carbohydrates, the added sugar, and the refined seed oils for reversing it.